It's Friday and you're watching FreightWaves Now. I'm your host Anthony Smith, and coming up, Andrew Cox is going to give us a DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index update. But first, we're going to go to Zach Strickland with the Carrier Update, brought to you by Powerfleet. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, and welcome to your Carrier Update presented by Powerfleet. I'm Zach Strickland, and today we're talking about those freight volumes continuing their big rise throughout the week. The last 4 days in a row, we have seen pretty tremendous increase in freight volumes. We are now up over 9,800 on the outbound tender volume index, 9,882. The last time we were this high, ignoring this big mountain of anomaly here, was back on February 27th, where we were at 9,877. So a lot like February in terms of volumes. Again, it's the good news here for the carriers out there is that these volumes continue to increase. We are looking at a pretty strong trend up. Now, is it here to stay is really the question. So I've built out a chart here for you to look at. Here's the outbound tender volume index, which you just saw in orange, and underneath that is a baseline chart of customs data. Now, these are imports coming into the United States. It is not a one-to-one connection by any means with the outbound tender volumes or truckload shipments, but it is a pretty decent representation of shipper activity. Shippers, of course, will put in these orders for these custom shipments 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time because it takes some time to fulfill those orders and then move them across the water. This is kind of a leading indicator of shipper sentiment, if you will. So looking at how they interact together over time, there is a tiny bit of a correlation on a lag. If you look as shippers kind of pull some freight into the country before they start shipping it out, you see back here in August and September, the traditional peak of imports coming into the United States from China and Asia and other countries across the globe. We do see a lot of freight pulling into the country, getting ready for that retail push, retail season. We do also traditionally see freight come in, in more detail in January and February, right before Chinese New Year. We saw that happen this year. Both had pretty solid import volumes, and then they fell off dramatically. Down here in this red valley right here, that is where the Chinese New Year impact, along with coronavirus, really had a negative impact to import volumes coming to the United States. However, if you look right over here, at the very end, we see this huge spike. Imports were blowing up well above what you would expect for just about any time of year, but then you see right here at the end, they have fallen all the way back down to where they were right around the time of when the coronavirus and Chinese New Year was really having an impact. So the big concern here is, does this translate into the freight market in any circumstance? So the answer is probably in some way, but the timing, of course, is going to be at question. But again, shippers placed a lot of these orders 6 to 8 weeks ago, which was well into March, early part of the coronavirus pandemic in the United States. So we will have to wait and see on that. But for now, take advantage of those freight volumes really pushing. I think the biggest question here is going to be, where we see those volumes diminish first, or we will probably have some sort of correction here in the near term, but we're not really sure just yet when that's going to happen. So looking at the Port of Los Angeles, breaking this down a little bit further into more detail, this is the OTVI LAX with the customs imports into Los Angeles. It's a little hard to see here, but we are paying attention to the outbound tender volume index really spiking out of Los Angeles. This is an important detail to know because a lot of these volumes that you're seeing on the outbound tender volume index is coming from the port cities, especially the ones on the West Coast like Los Angeles, Ontario, of course, not a port city specifically, but has a huge connection to it. And we're seeing the same thing here with customs dropping off, tremendously here towards the end. So outbound tender rejection index for Los Angeles, in general, is on the rise, VOTRI, but then also ROTRI, the reefer outbound tender rejection index, poking up there as well. Tender volumes on the rise out of Los Angeles, as we mentioned, strong increase, statistically significant increase there. Also in Ontario, 18.18% increase week over week in Ontario. So both of these markets really have a leading indicator for the rest of the country, especially as it turns into, standard volumes, replenishment orders, etc. So a lot of those will turn into short haul volumes in the near term. And then, of course, produce season may be showing initial signs as reefer rates starting to pick back up according to the USDA. So everything's kind of picking up a little bit for the near term. We'll see how long they last, and that'll do it for today's carrier update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Welcome to the DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index Update. I'm here with Andrew Cox. Andrew, what do you have for us?
Tony, today we've moved up 5 points off of the all-time low. So we were at 10 last week and the previous week, which meant the shippers were had almost all the dominant power. They're still in a really comfortable position here in bid negotiations and in contract negotiations, but the power has moved a little bit to the carriers this week. And as I've said in previous PPIs, it's not really constructive for either the carriers nor the shippers for volumes to be at this holiday level like they were during April. So it's really good news for both sides that volumes have now truthfully surged over the last couple weeks. Off the bottom on April 16th, we're up over 15%. As Zach said, we're now near 9,900 on the outbound tender volume index. And we are year-over-year positive, but it's kind of a worthless comparison because May of 2019 was so odd with the Trump tweets and the trade tariffs being put in. It was really a down month. So the year-over-year comparable is not great, but the truth is that volumes are picking up, which is good for both sides.
And you just mentioned DHL Supply Chain Index. It just bumped up from that all-time low. Many people are expecting or anticipating April really being the trough of everything. I mean, we're seeing volume starting to return. We're seeing some of the worst macroeconomic numbers. We're looking at the entire month of April, especially we have retail sales, industrial production coming out that have hit historical lows. Are you anticipating that the index, the DHL Supply Chain Index, has also reached a low and is going to remain above that 15 mark?
I do. I think 10 was the low last week. I do think we're going to rebound from there. I just think it can't go much lower from there. And so it's coming off a depressed base. That's one thing. But the truth is that things are looking up for the carriers. If we look at some of the spot volumes, the spot market volumes, you can see a lot of green here from our truck stop van spot market volume. So a lot of these markets are actually getting some spot market volume, which hasn't been the case for the last few weeks. And this is going to be the really big thing to watch for me, which is our outbound tender rejection index. It typically lags behind volumes by a few days, behind our OTVI. So you can see a little bit of upward pressure coming up on the far end there, up off the bottom of 2.5% to roughly 3.1. And you've seen reefer rejection rates also climb up a little bit. So this is telling me that carriers are now beginning to have just a little bit of options they didn't have a couple weeks ago. They're now rejecting some loads, but they're still really accepting most of everything.
Right, and Andrew, you pull up to here, you mentioned reefer and I believe van. So looking at reefer and van, those two, of course, going to make up a vast majority of the equipment types and really going to be the ones benefiting here. Of course, the laggard, flatbed, yep. Very few catalysts there in that aspect, with industrial sectors really struggling right now. Do you think the coming weeks or months will be any kind of upward momentum for autos?
I would hope so. I mean, you see on Monday that the Detroit auto manufacturers are restarting production, and we've heard that Mexico is going to roll out some of their automotive production back on Monday as well. So they're trying to time up the supply chains there because they are very intertwined. But I'm really worried about the demand for new cars, not only because of consumer demand, because people are out of work and they've lost their income, and I just don't see them making big durable goods purchases like that. But also we're hearing words that Hertz, one of the nation's biggest car rental companies, may be going under, and car rental companies purchase 1/3 of all the new cars off the lot. So, and Hertz is a national player, so that's a big damage to new car sales. So I'm worried about autos. I'm hoping that there are other parts of the industrial and manufacturing economy that can come online as well, kind of in tandem with the autos. But I am worried about durable goods through the end of 2020.
Rightfully so, and as you mentioned, consumers are going to be struggling to make these big ticket purchases. That doesn't stop at autos, but of course we're looking at furniture, home appliances, and things like that.
Yeah, most certainly. I do think that the demand for non-durable goods and for retail can come back pretty quickly. I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing volume surge so quickly right now, is that consumers are getting out and spending money. If we look at that Bank of America credit card and debit card spending has troughed in almost every category, and it's coming up. Last week it was only down 10% year over year, which is really a really positive sign. But again, yeah, I think we'll be good on the retail side relatively soon in a couple quarters, but it may take several quarters to a couple years before that durable goods demand comes back.
Andrew, thank you so much. Insightful as always. And thank you so much for tuning in. That's going to do it for this DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index update. Thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to tune in next week for all the latest. Thank you for tuning in, and that's going to do for this Friday edition of FreightWaves Now, but the content doesn't stop here. We're always streaming around the clock, so check out our FreightWaves TV app on all your favorite streaming platforms, including Apple TV. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.